The year was 1865, the final auction before freedom was declared. Beneath a weeping sky, a single woman stood on the block, her wrists chained, her eyes hollow. When her new master took her home, he thought he'd purchased silence. But by nightfall, he realized he'd bought something else entirely. Dread itself. The war had ended, yet the old habits of men died slower than law. In a forgotten corner of Georgia, the town of Fairhaven held one last slave auction. Quiet, unrecorded, and illegal. The courthouse steps were slick with rain that morning, and the few who gathered did so in whispers. Among the small gathering stood a man named Charles Whitmore, a former Confederate officer turned landholder. His cotton fields had been abandoned. During the war, his fortune evaporated. He came not to defy the new order, he told himself, but to preserve what was left of his livelihood. Yet something in his face, the hollow under his eyes, spoke of desperation, not commerce. When the woman was brought forth, the crowd drew silent. She was tall, scarred, her skin a deep bronze that seemed to swallow the morning light. Her name was Alara, though the auctioneer spoke it wrong. She did not flinch when the gavel struck. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as if she were listening for something no one else could hear. Whitmore bought her for $28, the last sale before the abolition reached Fairhaven. The sheriff signed no record. The transaction was meant to vanish. But that night, when Whitmore brought Alara to his decaying plantation, the storm followed them home. He offered her food, shelter, even a bed in the servants' quarters. She said nothing. Her silence was not fear. It was weight. Something about the air changed when she entered the house. The walls, swollen from years of humidity, seemed to creak differently, as if acknowledging her return. In the dead of night, Whitmore awoke to the sound of footsteps pacing the upper hall. Slow, deliberate, measured. He assumed it was Alara, restless in a strange place. But when he stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped. The corridor smelled faintly of iron and candle wax. When dawn came, he found her standing outside, barefoot, facing the woods. "Were you walking?" he asked. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "No," she said, voice low, certain. "It was the house." That was the first time she spoke, and the first time he felt the cold edge of something beyond understanding. If you'd been Charles Whitmore that morning, would you have believed her, or left before night fell again? The Whitmore estate stood on a hill overlooking the Ocmulgee River, a crumbling monument to what the locals once called cotton royalty. Its veranda sagged, the windows clouded with decades of dust. But inside, the house still smelled faintly of tobacco, lamp oil and something else, something old and metallic, like rusted blood. Charles Whitmore had not slept since bringing Alara home. She moved like a shadow through the hallways, quiet, deliberate, never startling the creaks beneath her feet. She scrubbed the floors, polished the silver, tended the fire. Yet Whitmore felt as though she were listening instead of working. Each time he passed her, her eyes seemed to follow him, not with defiance, but with weary expectation. On the third night, a sound broke through the silence. It was faint at first, like humming. A woman's voice, soft and mournful, drifting through the parlor walls. Whitmore froze. The melody was one he recognized, though he couldn't recall from where. It spoke of rivers, chains, and lost children. When he entered the parlor, Alara was there, staring at the empty hearth, her lips still. The humming continued, coming from beneath the floorboards. He demanded to know what she was hiding. She simply looked at him and said, "The house remembers." Then she turned away, as if the conversation were finished. That night, Whitmore went into the cellar with a lantern and a pistol. The air was cold, stale, unmoving. Old barrels lined the walls, their staves warped with moisture. In the far corner, a narrow wooden door, one he didn't recall ever seeing, stood ajar. From behind it came that same humming, low and rhythmic. He stepped closer, the lantern flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw something pressed against the wood, small, pale fingers curling and retreating. He staggered back, heart hammering, and slammed the door shut. When he returned upstairs, Alara was waiting at the top of the stairs. Her expression was calm, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "It won't let you leave," she whispered. "Not until it's done with you." Whitmore wanted to ask what it was, but he couldn't bring himself to. Her words felt less like a warning and more like a truth the house had already decided. By morning the humming had stopped. The air was still again. But when he walked past the parlor wall, the paint seemed darker, as if something beneath the plaster had seeped through overnight. If you were him, would you have dared open that door again, or burned the house before sunset? By the 5th day, the house began to feel heavier, not in air or temperature, but in presence. Every breath seemed to echo, every silence carried shape. Whitmore tried to convince himself that exhaustion was to blame. The war had left him, haunted already. Perhaps this was just the mind's echo of guilt. But then he saw the marks. It happened mid-morning. He was walking the main hallway when the sun broke briefly through the storm clouds, casting thin light across the wall. The paint seemed uneven, bubbled in places. When he ran his fingers across it, a piece flaked away, revealing faint carvings beneath. Not random scratches, letters. He cleared more, careful, brushing aside dust. Beneath the whitewash, a message began to appear, carved deep into the wood. 4 words. They never left here. His breath caught. The letters were jagged, desperate, carved by a hand that trembled. He called for Alara, but she didn't answer. He found her in the kitchen, staring out the window toward the slave quarters, long since empty. Her voice was distant when she spoke. "You shouldn't uncover what they covered, Master Whitmore. The walls were sealed to keep their sound in." He demanded to know what she meant, but she turned away. "You think this house belonged to you," she said softly, "but it has had many masters, and not all of them were living." That night, he brought a lantern and began scraping at more walls. In the parlor, the bedrooms, even along the staircase. Beneath each layer of paint, he found carvings, names, dates, fragments of prayers. The oldest dated back to 1833, the year Whitmore's father first purchased the property. One wall bore dozens of tallies, hundreds of lines marked by fingernails or knives. By midnight, the humming had returned. Louder this time, clearer. It wasn't just one voice, it was many. A chorus of soft, wordless moans seeping from behind the plaster. Whitmore pressed his ear against the wall and felt something cold touch the other side. A slow, deliberate brush against his skin, as if fingers were tracing his outline. He stumbled back, lantern shaking. The flames guttered, and the voices stopped instantly, replaced by a low, dragging sound moving across the ceiling above. Whitmore looked up. Dust fell like rain. And then came the whisper, impossibly close, to his ear. "He sold us here, but never let us go." The lantern fell and shattered. Darkness swallowed the hall. "Tell me, if you'd read those words on your wall, would you have stayed to find out who carved them? Or fled into the storm without looking back?" By dawn, Charles Whitmore's sanity hung by a thread. The walls had fallen silent again, but silence now felt worse than sound, too deliberate, too watching. He sat at his desk with the pistol. In front of him, half drunk, half awake, staring through the window toward the old slave quarters that stood like tombs beyond the trees. They had burned once, decades ago, or so the locals said. His father never spoke of it, only that some trouble had taken place and the ashes had been left to rot. But that morning, through the veil of mist, Whitmore swore he saw smoke. Thin gray tendrils rose from the collapsed roofs. He blinked. It was gone. Then he saw something else, a flicker of movement, a figure standing among the ruins, tall and still. He thought it was Alara. He called out her name, but she appeared. Behind him, silent as a shadow, carrying water for the horses. When he turned back to the window, the figure had vanished. "Alara," he said slowly, "when did the fire happen?" She paused. "Which one?" That answer turned his stomach. She told him of nights long before the war, of punishments that ended in screams, of slaves locked inside the quarters when the cotton yields failed. They said the master's wrath was God's, she murmured, eyes far away. But even God turned his face from this place. Whitmore walked to the quarters before dusk, carrying only a lantern. The air grew colder as he neared the ruins. Charred timbers lay like black ribs in the soil. Among the debris, something glimmered faintly, glass beads, melted together by heat. And beneath them, half buried in the earth, a child's shoe. The ground beneath his boots felt hollow. He knelt, brushed the dirt aside, and uncovered the edge of a board. The wood beneath was scorched, but when he lifted it, a wave of warmth rose, like breath. His lantern light revealed a pit, wide, dark, lined with bones. Dozens of them. For a moment, Whitmore couldn't move. The bones weren't arranged by chance. They were stacked methodically, like logs for a fire. And at the center, a single object, a rusted iron collar engraved with his family's crest. The lantern shook in his hands. Behind him, the wind rose, carrying voices, faint, desperate, as though carried through ash. He turned back toward the house. In the upper window, a candle burned, but no one had lit it. If you saw that light, knowing what lay beneath your land, would you walk toward it might or leave everything behind forever? When Whitmore returned from the quarters, night had already swallowed the valley. The house stood in silhouette against a rising moon, and in the second-floor window, the one above the nursery, a candle burned steady and pale. No flame should have survived that wind. He entered through the front door, boots heavy with mud and dread. The air inside was different now, thicker, damp with an odor that reminded him of rain-soaked linen and old copper. Somewhere above, a floorboard sighed. "Ilara?" he called. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the hall's empty breath. From the kitchen came the faint clatter of metal, a spoon against a pot. When he reached the doorway, he found her standing still, eyes fixed toward the ceiling. "Who lit that candle?" he asked. She did not turn. Her lips trembled when she answered, "It's not for the living." He climbed the stairs anyway. Every step groaned as if the house itself objected. The upper hallway smelled faintly, of lavender and smoke, an impossible combination that made his eyes sting. The nursery door was ajar. The candle sat on the windowsill, its light unnaturally still, untouched by draft or motion. Whitmore entered, his reflection rippling in the glass. The room had not been used in decades. Toys lay in a neat row across the floor. Wooden soldiers, a doll missing its head, and a small cradle coated in dust. The air trembled, faintly, humming. He reached for the candle. The moment his fingers touched the brass holder, the flame flared blue. The room's temperature dropped sharply, his breath turning white. And then, a sound. Soft at first, then clearer. The creak of the cradle rocking itself. Whitmore froze. The candlelight wavered, and within its glow, a faint outline appeared in the cradle. Small, shifting, like the shimmer of heat above fire. Then came a whisper, fragile as breath. "Mama said we could rest now." He stumbled backward, knocking, into the wall. The candle extinguished. For an instant, total darkness. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the room toward him. He ran, half falling down the stairs, and found Ilara waiting at the bottom, her face pale in the moonlight. "You've seen them," she said softly. "Now they will show you everything." She turned toward the parlor, where the fire had somehow lit itself, a low orange glow spilling across the room. They've been waiting for someone to listen. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, and the wind slammed the front door shut behind him. If a spirit spoke to you, not in rage but in sorrow, would you dare listen? Or seal the house forever in silence? The fire in the parlor burned too bright for the kindling Whitmore remembered using. Its glow filled the house with a feverish light, casting shadows that moved with unnatural purpose. Ilara stood before it, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the flames as though they were speaking directly to her. Whitmore entered cautiously. The closer he drew, the more he realized. The fire gave off no heat. Its light shimmered, but the air remained cold. A trick of the eyes, he told himself. Yet when he reached the hearth, he saw the impossible. The logs were soaked through, dripping with moisture. Still, they burned. "Ilara," he said, voice trembling. "What is this?" Her reply came in a tone that was neither defiance nor obedience, but something in between. Weary, knowing. "It burns for remembrance. They made sure it would never die." He crouched near the flames and saw movement within them. Not tongues of fire, but shapes. Faces, half-formed, rising and vanishing like reflections in disturbed water. A woman with hollow eyes. A child's small hand. The suggestion of a man screaming without sound. Then came the smell, sweet and bitter, like molasses overwrought. It struck him suddenly what it was: burned flesh and sugar cane. His father had once told him about the old fire, how a rebellion had been silenced with gunpowder and a torch. "A lesson for the rest," the old man had said, proud. Now, in the quiet of that cursed room, Whitmore understood what had been burned wasn't rebellion. It was people. The fire roared suddenly, sending sparks toward the ceiling. Ilara stepped forward, lifting her hand. "Stop," she whispered. The flames lowered at her voice, shrinking into a blue core. Whitmore stared at her, realization dawning. She wasn't afraid because she knew the fire. She'd seen it before. She turned to him then, eyes glinting with the reflection of the coals. "You bought me thinking I was the last," she said, softly. "But I was the first." The floor shuddered. The portraits on the wall rattled in their frames. A low, guttural moan filled the house, rising from the foundation, as if the very earth beneath them were remembering. Whitmore stumbled back, shouting, "What do you mean?" Ilara looked past him, her expression suddenly gentle, almost mournful. "You'll see. They've been waiting to show you what he did." And as she spoke, the fire flared again, and within the flame's heart, a vision began to form. "If you saw the crimes of your own bloodline burning in front of you, would you turn away, or watch until you understood every sin?" Whitmore's knees buckled as the fire swelled, the walls pulsing with light that flickered between orange and blue. The parlor seemed to breathe, boards swelling and contracting, glass trembling in the window panes. The air itself thickened, heavy as syrup. He could not move nor look away. Inside the flames, images began to form, faint at first, then sharp as memory. He saw the plantation as it once was, bright, alive, the cotton fields rolling like white seas beneath the sun. His father stood at the center, a proud figure in a linen coat, barking orders to men and women whose faces bore no expression but endurance. Then came the sound, the rhythmic crack of a whip. The figures flinched in unison. The vision turned, showing the slave quarters whole again, filled with laughter and song that was not joy, but survival. Whitmore's heart pounded. He was watching ghosts live the same day they had died. The fire shifted again. He saw the night of the rebellion, a moment his father had forbidden to be spoken of. The men, desperate, armed with tools and fury, rushing toward the main house. Torches flared. Screams cut the darkness. And then the betrayal. His father standing on the porch, rifle raised, his voice calm as he ordered the doors barred and the quarters set ablaze. Smoke filled the vision, black and endless. Inside, shapes thrashed, hands clawing at windows. The fire roared louder than before, until Whitmore thought his own skin might blister. But then he saw something that froze his blood. Among those burning figures stood a woman, tall, unmoving, her face turned toward the main house. Ilara, not younger, not older. The same. Her eyes locked with his across the fire, and the image broke apart like shattered glass. Whitmore staggered backward, gasping. The flames returned to normal, crackling gently as though nothing had happened. He turned to Ilara, his face pale, voice shaking. "You were there," he whispered. "You can't be." She cut him off. "You think time buries what was done here? Time is the soil, and this house grows from it." Outside, wind howled through the shutters. The fire snapped, sending sparks that landed at Whitmore's feet. Each spark hissed like a whisper, "We remember." He clutched his head, trembling. "What do you want from me?" Alara's gaze softened. "Not you, the truth." The clock struck midnight, and for the first time in years, the house answered. Floorboards groaning, doors slamming, walls sighing like lungs pulling in breath. If you saw your family's sins replay before you, every cruelty, every scream, would you destroy the past, or let it destroy you? The clock's toll faded into silence, leaving the house suspended in a dreadful stillness. Even the wind outside seemed to halt, as though the entire valley held its breath. Whitmore stood before the dying fire, his face ashen, his mind unraveling, under the weight of what he had seen. He turned to Alara, who remained motionless by the hearth. "You were there that night," he whispered. "You can't be human." Her eyes flicked toward him, dark and bottomless. "I was what they made me," she said softly, "and what they could not kill." The words chilled him more than the cold air ever could. She stepped closer, the light flickering across her face, and for a heartbeat, Whitmore saw another woman beneath her skin, flickering in and out of being like a reflection in rippled water. A woman burned but unbroken, her eyes alight with both grief and vengeance. "Your father promised freedom," Alara said, voice trembling. "He gathered us in the quarters, said the war was lost and he would grant mercy. But when the sun fell, he barred the doors and poured the oil." Her voice broke. "I carried his child. He thought fire would cleanse his sin, but fire does not forgive." Whitmore's stomach twisted. "His child?" Alara nodded slowly. "Born in the smoke, neither of life nor death, the child that would not cry." The floor creaked above them, slow, deliberate, like the steps of someone small. Whitmore looked up, every muscle in his body locking. The sound moved toward the staircase. He grabbed the lantern, but the flame within dimmed as if strangled by unseen hands. A child's laugh, faint, echoing, drifted down from the upper hall. It was not playful, it was hollow. Ilara's voice dropped to a whisper. "He tried to burn his blood clean, but blood remembers. That's what he left behind." Whitmore's throat tightened. Then, "Why bring me here? Why now?" "Because the fire waits," she said, "and it burns until the guilty confess." A sudden knock shattered the air, not from the front door, but from inside the walls. 3 slow, deliberate strikes. Then a whisper through the cracks. "Tell the truth, son of Whitmore." The lantern went out completely. In the dark, Alara's voice trembled. "It's time you speak for him." Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time it came from beneath the earth. "If you were forced to confess to the crimes of your bloodline, could you bear the weight of their ghosts listening in the dark?" The house groaned as if awakening, its beams stretching and settling like bones shifting beneath skin. Whitmore stood frozen, his breath shallow, the sound of faint footsteps skittering between the walls, light, quick, and impossibly deliberate. It was not the sound of rats or wood settling. It was the careful pacing of something small and aware. He raised the lantern, but its light refused to flare back to life. Only the embers from the fireplace glowed, casting long, trembling shadows across the parlor. Alara's face hovered at the edge of that glow, her eyes glassy with memory. "He's here," she whispered. "He's always been here, listening, waiting for a name." Whitmore swallowed. "A name?" "The one your father never spoke, the one he erased before the fire took her." Before Whitmore could respond, the sound came again, closer, behind the wallpaper now. A slow dragging, followed by a small, deliberate knock. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. Whitmore's voice was low, shaking. "You said the child was born that night. What happened to it?" Alara turned toward the wall. her hand trembling as she reached out. It never left. The wallpaper pulsed under her fingertips, a faint movement, like something breathing just behind it. Whitmore stepped forward, his heart pounding. "That's impossible," he muttered. "No one could survive in—" The wall answered. A faint, muffled giggle rippled through the boards, followed by the unmistakable sound of tiny fingers scratching their way downward. "Please stop," Whitmore hissed. But Alara's expression had changed. Her face was no longer sorrowful. It was resolute, almost maternal. She whispered toward the wall, voice quivering. "He's here, little one. You can speak now. You can tell him what his father did." The scratching grew louder. Plaster cracked. A child's voice, warped, distant, neither boy nor girl, echoed faintly through the boards. "You left us burning." Whitmore stumbled backward. "That's not real. That's not—" But the boards began to bulge outward, as if something was pressing from within, clawing to get free. A splinter cracked, then another. Alara turned to him. "Every sin your father buried lives here. Every scream, every breath he smothered. You can't leave until you hear them all." The wall split open, a jagged seam from floor to ceiling, revealing darkness that seemed to breathe. From within, a small hand reached out, gray and trembling, its fingers burned black at the tips. Whitmore fell to his knees, trembling. "Dear God!" But Alara only stared into the fissure, her voice both gentle and commanding. "No, Whitmore, not God. Blood." And from the darkness the child whispered again, this time almost tenderly. "Father?" The air turned heavy, almost liquid, pressing against Whitmore's chest. The lantern, still dim in his shaking hand, flickered as though smothered by unseen breath. The hand, that tiny gray hand, trembled at the edge of the wall's opening, and Whitmore could hear faint wet breaths coming from within the darkness. He stumbled backward. "It can't be real," he muttered. "It's not possible." Alara didn't move. She stood inches from the fissure, her expression calm but her eyes hollow, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. "It's real," she whispered. "This house was built on more than wood and nails. It was built on blood, on promises your father never kept. He thought the debt would die with her, but debts like that don't fade. They wait." Whitmore's throat was dry. "A debt? What are you talking about?" Alara turned toward him, her gaze piercing. "Your father bought her with the last of his silver. He thought he owned her body, but she owned his fate. When she died, the balance broke. Now the bloodline carries it, until it's paid." Whitmore's pulse thundered. "I'm not him," he shouted. "Whatever he did—" A whisper cut him off. It came from inside the wall, soft yet impossibly close. "You carry his face." Whitmore froze. His own reflection in a shard of broken glass near the hearth wavered, but it wasn't his face that stared back. It was his father's, older, crueler, the same cold eyes. The child's voice grew louder now, its tone twisted by centuries of confinement. "You burned us to hide your shame. You thought the fire would cleanse, but it only sealed the door." Alara began to cry, not tears of sorrow, but relief. "He remembers," she whispered, "all these years, and he remembers." The wall widened further, revealing not a room but a tunnel of blackened wood, the charred remains of beams curling inward like ribs. From deep within came faint whispers, dozens, maybe hundreds, each overlapping the next, a chorus of the lost. Whitmore clutched his chest, gasping. "Tell me what I have to do." Alara's voice was soft, trembling. "The debt must be repaid in blood freely given, not stolen." A chill swept through the room as Whitmore's lantern guttered and died. Only the child's voice remained, closer now, just behind his ear. "Then give it." He turned, but there was no one there. Only Alara, holding something, small and rusted in her hand. A blade, blackened with age, its handle wrapped in decayed leather. She offered it to him gently. "Your father took a life to buy peace. Now, only your blood can end it." Whitmore stared at the blade, his heartbeat echoing through the empty house. "If I do this, will it stop?" Ilara looked toward the wall, where the child's faint silhouette swayed in the dark. "No," she said. "It will only begin." The dawn never came for the Whitmore plantation. The house stood wrapped in an eternal gray, its windows veiled with frost, though it was the middle of spring. Inside, Whitmore sat in the great hall, pale, trembling, and slick with sweat. The blade lay on the table before him, gleaming faintly in the half-light. Ilara stood beside the hearth, watching him. Her presence was neither comforting nor cruel. She was merely there, like a judge at the end of all things. "The auction never ended," she murmured. "You think it stopped when the last slave woman was sold. But souls don't obey papers or law. What was taken must still be accounted for." Whitmore's hands shook as he lifted the blade. "And my blood will settle this debt." Ilara shook her head slowly. "Your blood opens the door. It doesn't close it." A sudden gust howled through the hall, scattering ashes from the hearth into the air. They shimmered like black snow. Whitmore's vision blurred as he saw them form shapes, faces, dozens of them. Women and children, their eyes wide and hollow, their mouths whispering through the dust. He staggered to his feet. "What do you want from me?" The faces in the ash spoke as one. "Remember us." Ilara approached, her voice almost breaking. That was her final wish, not vengeance, remembrance. But your family buried her name, her child, and every soul that came after. That is why the curse lingers. Whitmore's eyes widened as realization clawed at him. The child, the one in the wall. Ilara nodded. Born in silence, burned before she could cry. Your father's doing. Whitmore sank to his knees, clutching the blade. "Then tell me what to do." "Write her name," Ilara whispered. "Say it aloud. Free her voice." The table shook. Ink and parchment slid toward him as if moved by invisible hands. The pen trembled between his fingers. He hesitated, then wrote the name. Ilara spoke. "Amara." The moment he whispered it, the air fractured like glass. The walls bled with light, soft, golden, and unbearably sorrowful. From the tunnel came the faint sound of a lullaby, carried on wind that smelled of smoke and lilies. Ilara knelt beside him. "It's done," she said. "She remembers your mercy." But as Whitmore looked around, the house began to vanish. The furniture, the portraits, even the floorboards, dissolving into thin air, leaving only the echo of that single name, Amara. Ilara smiled faintly as her form began to fade too. "Now you will remember," she said, as she was made to remember. Whitmore tried to reach for her, but his hands met only air. By morning, there was no house left on the Whitmore grounds, only a scorched field and a single gravestone, half buried in ash. The inscription read, "The last woman sold, and the first to be freed." Pause. If you had lived in that time, and heard her name whispered in the dark, would you have stayed or run? Tell me your thoughts below.